You can learn everything you need to know about a man by how he behaves when he thinks he holds all the cards. I stood in the expansive, marble floored lobby of the Grand Horizon Hotel, the ambient noise of clinking espresso cups and quiet chatter humming in the background. My name is Zara. I was 36, the lead operations architect for a mid sized tech firm, and I had spent the last 10 months meticulously crafting the framework for a $2.3 billion infrastructure deal with Vanguard Tech. Beside me was Julian, the 28-year-old newly appointed CEO. He hadn't earned the title. He had inherited it from his father 3 weeks ago. He wore a custom suit that looked a little too tight and carried an air of unearned confidence that suffocated everyone around him. As we approached the front desk to check in the executive team, I pulled out my corporate Centurion card, the black card I had been issued years ago by the founder to manage high-level vendor accounts and massive cloud server expenses. Julian glanced at my hand, and a loud, sharp laugh escaped his chest. He turned to the two Vanguard representatives standing nearby, gesturing toward me like I was a punchline. "Look at this," Julian sneered, shaking his head. "Accounting must have made a massive error giving a back-office worker one of these. Don't worry, guys. I'll make sure she doesn't buy out the minibar on the company dime." The front desk clerk froze, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, clearly uncomfortable. The Vanguard reps exchanged a quick, unreadable glance. I didn't flush. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Julian's smug, arrogant face, realizing instantly that a decade of loyalty to this company meant absolutely nothing. I wasn't about to stay and be the background character in his ego trip. I didn't argue with him. Arguing requires a mutual respect that simply didn't exist in that lobby. Instead, I slowly placed the heavy metal card back into my wallet, the satisfying click of the clasp sounding loud in my own ears. Julian was already turning his back to me, busy boasting to the Vanguard executives about his grand vision for the future, a future built entirely on the blueprints I had spent countless nights designing. While he talked, I pulled out my phone and opened a message thread with Marcus, Vanguard's lead technical director, who was supposed to fly in the next morning. My thumbs moved quickly and deliberately over the screen. "Marcus, there has been a critical shift in leadership dynamics. I am stepping down from my position, effective immediately. The infrastructure integration is no longer under my control." I hit send. There was no hesitation, no lingering doubt. I had boundaries, and Julian had just sprinted past them with a megaphone. I turned to the front desk clerk, who was still looking at me with wide, apologetic eyes. I gave her a polite nod, picked up the handle of my sleek carry-on suitcase, and quietly walked away. The hotel's revolving glass doors offered a brief rush of warm evening air as I stepped out onto the busy street. I didn't look back. Inside, Julian finished his self-congratulatory monologue and casually reached behind him, snapping his fingers to tell me to grab his briefcase. He expected to find a subservient employee waiting for his command. Instead, he grabbed empty air. The following morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom on the 20th floor was pristine. Trays of fresh pastries lined the mahogany credenza. The scent of dark roast coffee filled the air, and the projection screen displayed the title slide of the Vanguard merger. Julian sat at the head of the long table, leaning back in his leather chair, practically radiating triumph. The Vanguard team sat across from him, their laptops open, but their posture was rigid. Marcus, Vanguard's lead director, had flown in on a red-eye flight and looked less than thrilled. He kept glancing toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. "All right, let's get down to business," Julian announced, clapping his hands together loudly. "We have a historic agreement to finalize today. I've personally reviewed the high-level metrics, and I'm ready to push this forward." Marcus didn't touch the contract folder resting in front of him. He looked around the room, his brow furrowing. "Where is Zara?" he asked, his voice flat and serious. Julian waved a hand dismissively, letting out a small scoff. "Zara? She had a minor attitude problem in the lobby yesterday. I imagine she's pouting in her room or catching an early flight home. It doesn't matter. I'm the CEO. I make the final call on this architecture." Marcus slowly closed his laptop. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room, pulling the attention of every executive present. He leaned forward, interlocking his fingers, staring directly into Julian's arrogant eyes. You clearly don't understand what you are selling, Marcus said quietly. Julian's confident smile faltered slightly, but he quickly tried to recover with a light chuckle. Marcus, I assure you, my engineering team can handle whatever technical details Zara usually manages. She's just a project lead. The company is what matters. No, Julian, Marcus corrected, his tone turning ice cold. Zara is not just a project lead. She designed the proprietary bridge that makes this entire integration possible. Vanguard isn't investing $2.3 billion into your brand name. We are investing in her operational architecture and her guarantee that it will scale. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, retrieved his phone, and slid it across the polished wood table. The screen was brightly lit, displaying the text, "Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear." This message I had sent him the night before. Julian leaned over to read it, his eyes scanning the words. As the reality of the message set in, the color rapidly drained from his face. She can't do this," Julian stammered, his voice losing its booming authority. "She works for me. I own her output." "She already did it," Marcus replied, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "And since the core architect has abandoned the project citing leadership instability, our risk assessment has fundamentally changed. We are pausing this deal indefinitely." Panic finally pierced through Julian's arrogance that he scrambled for his own phone, dialing my number with shaking hands. It went straight to voicemail. I had blocked his number the moment I left the hotel. Desperation taking over. Julian shoved his chair back and bolted out of the boardroom. He thought he could just drag me back to the table. "Hello. Dear viewers of Her Fear, we received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, that means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear. Panic is a fascinating thing to observe in someone who has never been told no. When Julian sprinted out of the boardroom, he wasn't thinking like a CEO. He was reacting like a child who had just dropped his favorite toy. He hit the lobby floor with his tie slightly skewed, the polished, arrogant facade entirely shattered. He marched straight to the front desk, bypassing a line of waiting guests, and slammed his palm onto the marble counter. The same clerk from the night before jolted backward, her eyes widening. "I need the room key for Zara's suite," Julian demanded, his voice echoing sharply off the high glass ceilings. "Right now. She's an employee of my company, and I need to see her immediately." "Sir, I cannot give out guest keys or disclose room numbers," the clerk answered, her voice trembling slightly but holding firm to privacy protocols. "And as I recall, that guest checked out of the premises last night." "You're lying. Look at the system," Julian yelled, losing the last thread of his composure. He leaned aggressively over the desk, invading the clerk's personal space. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? I am trying to save a multi-billion-dollar merger, and you are standing in my way. Give me her location, or I'll have your job." The duty manager, observing the escalating situation from the back office, didn't hesitate. He picked up his radio and signaled for immediate assistance. Within moments, heavy footsteps approached Julian from behind. "Sir, step away from the desk," a deep, firm voice ordered. Julian whipped around to find two broad-shouldered hotel security guards standing uncomfortably close. He opened his mouth to shout his title, to explain how much his suit cost and how important he was. He even managed a condescending smirk, ready to threaten the hotel with a massive lawsuit for obstructing his business. But he never got the chance to speak. Minutes later, security got a call from the Vanguard executives upstairs, officially requesting that Julian be escorted off the property for hostile behavior. The lead guard relayed the message, and Julian's smile vanished completely. I wasn't far away. In fact, I was sitting by the window of a quiet, artisanal coffee shop directly across the street from the Grand Horizon. I held a warm cup of espresso, watching the glass doors of the hotel, right on cue. I saw Julian being firmly ushered out by the two security guards. He was pacing on the sidewalk, running his hands through his hair, aggressively typing on his phone. I didn't feel a rush of vindictive joy. I just felt a profound sense of clarity. For 10 years, I had compromised my own worth to build a foundation for people who only saw me as a replaceable asset. That ended today. But I hadn't just walked away blindly. I had walked away prepared. My phone vibrated on the wooden cafe table. It was a text from Mark, my closest colleague and the senior data analyst back at our headquarters. Julian is blowing up the executive group chat. He's screaming that you sabotaged the company network. It is trying to lock you out. What exactly did you do? I took a slow sip of my coffee before typing back. I didn't touch the network. Mark, I just revoked the company's access to my proprietary servers. 3 years ago, when the company refused to fund the development of the architecture, I'd built it using my own resources, legally registering the intellectual property under my independent LLC. I had been licensing it to the company for free. Julian, in his arrogance that had never bothered to read the fine print of my vendor agreements. I opened my email app, attached a formal notice of resignation and a cease and desist regarding the use of my IP, and sent it directly to the board of directors. CCING, the corporate legal team. I didn't list emotional grievances. I simply cited a breach of professional conduct and terminated the licensing agreement. I set my phone face down on the table, paid my bill, and hailed a cab to the airport. It was time to let the lawyers do the talking. By the time my flight landed back in my home city, the corporate fallout was already in full swing. I turned my phone off airplane mode, and a cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Vanguard Tech's legal counsel had officially issued a formal withdrawal notice to the board. The $2.3 billion deal was legally dead. Julian's attempt to salvage the situation had failed miserably once Vanguard pulled out. Word leaked into the industry network. Tech is a surprisingly small and ruthless world, and silence speaks louder than any frantic press release. Other prospective clients started calling our accounts department, asking nervous questions about the company's internal stability. Stock prices for the parent group took an immediate, sharp dip. Mark called me as I was unlocking the door to my apartment. "It is an absolute disaster zone here," he said, sounding both stressed and incredibly amused. Julian's dad came into the office with 3 corporate litigators. I have never seen the old man so furious. He pulled Julian into the glass conference room and shut the blinds, but everyone could still see the yelling. "I'm sorry you have to deal with the noise." "Mark," I replied, tossing my keys onto the counter and kicking off my shoes. "Don't be. Half the senior engineering team is already updating their resumes." Julian tried to tell the lawyers to sue you for breach of contract, but the legal team just printed out your licensing agreement. Mark laughed quietly. They realized they don't own a single line of the code that Vanguard wanted to buy. "I told them 3 years ago that the infrastructure was independent," I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. "They chose to ignore it because they thought I would never leave." "Well, they are definitely paying attention now," Mark sighed. "The board just suspended Julian pending an internal review. So, what's your next move?" I didn't spend the weekend obsessing over the drama. I didn't check the company's stock ticker. And I certainly didn't read the frantic, backpedaling emails Julian finally started sending when his father forced him to try and apologize. The emails were pathetic, filled with excuses about stress and misunderstandings. I deleted them without replying. Apologies demanded under the threat of bankruptcy aren't real. They are just survival tactics. Instead, I spent my time reorganizing my home office. I cleared out old company binders, wiped my personal server logs clean of their restrictive networks, and began drafting a fresh business plan. I had known for months that Julian's eventual takeover would be toxic. I just didn't expect him to hand me the perfect exit strategy on a silver platter in a hotel lobby. On Tuesday morning, I sat at my clean desk, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting warm lines across my keyboard. I wasn't rushing to find a new job. I had saved enough over the years, investing quietly to give myself the luxury of time. Then, my screen lit up with an incoming video call request. The caller ID wasn't a recruiter or a headhunter. It was Marcus from Vanguard Tech. I adjusted my posture, smoothed my shirt, and clicked accept. Marcus looked much more relaxed on the screen than he had in that tense Chicago boardroom. He was sitting in his own sleek office, holding a mug of tea. "Zara," he said, offering a genuine smile. "I heard you officially parted ways with your former employer. I hope the transition hasn't been too chaotic for you." "It's been surprisingly peaceful." "Marcus," I replied, matching his calm tone. "Silence is a great filter." He chuckled. "I can imagine. Listen, I won't waste your time. Vanguard pulled out of the merger because we realized we were buying a broken ship just to get to the captain. We don't want their outdated hardware, and we certainly don't want Julian's leadership. What we want is the infrastructure you designed." I leaned back in my chair, listening carefully. "Go on. We know you own the rights to the integration process." Marcus continued. "Vanguard wants to hire you directly as an independent consultant to build the architecture in-house. You name your team, you set your hours, and you name your price. We want the Zara standard, without the corporate dead weight." I didn't jump out of my seat or cheer. I just smiled. A quiet, grounded smile. This was the exact scenario I had prepared for. The exact reason I had refused to sign that non-compete clause years ago. "Send over the initial scope of work," I said. "Let's build something better." 3 weeks later, the industry landscape looked entirely different. Julian was quietly stepped down from his role as CEO, replaced by an interim board member to stop the bleeding. His brief tenure became a cautionary tale whispered in corporate break rooms. He had tried to assert dominance by humiliating someone he deemed beneath him, and it cost his family empire billions. I, on the other hand, signed the Vanguard contract under my newly registered LLC. My first official act as an independent founder was to send a job offer to Mark. He resigned from the old firm within the hour and joined me as my lead analyst. We rented a beautiful, open-concept office space with huge windows and plenty of natural light. There were no rigid corporate hierarchies, no arrogant heirs pacing the halls, and absolutely no tolerance for disrespect. On our first official day of operations, I stood by the window, holding a fresh cup of coffee, looking out over the city. My corporate black card was gone, replaced by a sleek, standard business card with my own company's name printed boldly on the front. I realized then that true power doesn't require shouting in lobbies or belittling others to feel tall. True power is knowing exactly what you are worth, refusing to accept a discount, and having the courage to simply walk away. Looking back, the most valuable thing I took away from that entire ordeal wasn't the new contract, the money, or even the vindication of watching Julian's ego collapse. It was a quiet realization about how we measure our own value. For a long time, I thought loyalty and hard work would eventually speak for themselves. I believed that if I just kept my head down and built a solid foundation, the respect would naturally follow. But I learned that loyalty to a place that doesn't respect you isn't dedication, it's self-sabotage. Your worth is never determined by how loudly you can defend yourself in a room full of people who are committed to underestimating you. You don't have to wait for a massive, explosive argument to realize it's time to leave. Sometimes, the final straw isn't a shout. It's just a casual joke or a dismissive laugh over a black card. When that moment comes, you don't need to yell, argue, or try to teach them a lesson. You just need to have your house in order, your boundaries firmly set, and the quiet courage to pack up your things and walk out the door. Because the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve, the world has no choice but to adjust to your new baseline. Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the coffee link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support her fear.